Welcome to the Divine Feminine Revolution podcast, where women are magical and empowered. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Monday, psychologist turned transformational feminine business coach. This podcast is for you if you want to prioritize your own pleasure, face your fears, and manifest your desires. This podcast is sponsored by the Fearless Feminine Academy, where I teach women how to turn their trauma into their superpowers. My goal is to show women that we can heal our world by creating time and financial freedom by doing whatever the fuck we want. Are you ready for the Divine Feminine Revolution? Let's get vulnerable and go deep. I'm so honored that you're here. Hey everyone, welcome to the Divine Feminine Revolution podcast. I'm really excited to have one of the most important people who helped me make this podcast possible, Tiffany Mason, and she's going to talk with us about starting your own podcast. So give us a little bit of a brag intro, like tell us about who you are and why you're awesome.
Okay, well, my company is Virtually You. And I focus mostly on podcast management. So I'm helping everybody go from, every aspect of creating a podcast and giving people some of their time back. So that's one of the things that people really notice as they start their podcast. They're like, wait a minute, this takes a lot of time. So usually people hand that off to me. I'm more than excited to do it. When I started my business, I was like, okay, editing's probably the one thing I won't do because it seems like the most overwhelming and whatever. No, it turns out that's one of my favorite things to do. So people give me their episode, I listen to it, try to take out all the misspeaks or maybe mouth sounds, or if they say whatever too much, and make it so it's an awesome episode that people want to listen to. So they have a good listening experience and they come back for another episode.
Yeah, and you yourself have a podcast. How did you get into the podcast biz as the passion?
Well, so I started listening to podcasts a while ago to JJ Virgin. She's a celebrity health coach. And so I was just really intrigued by her story. Her son actually had a traumatic brain injury. He was a hit and run, and the car just left him. And so she came out. He was 16. He was going to get the mail. And she had all this advice on things to do to help brain functionality and just health overall. And that was kind of my first podcast that really got me sucked in. And then I was listening. And then I actually took this really cool business program, and it was talking about following your passions and what lights you up. And so that's one of the things that lit me up, was really podcasts and just all the information that's out there for somebody to obtain. It's free to all of us. There's so many experts sharing their expertise with everybody, giving tips and tricks and try this, try that, and motivation and just so much. There's just a plethora of information out there. And podcasts are really becoming the thing. So I knew that it was a category that was on its way up, and people were really needing help with editing and getting their podcast ready. So I just took my love of listening to podcasts and melded it with the love of, managing it and helping people out.
Yeah, I love that because, I'm all about some pleasure-based business. And that's what I sort of found being a psychologist was like, I loved helping people, but there was a lot of aspects of the job that kind of burned me out. And so, coaching just had like sort of an effervescence around it. And so I love that you picked the subject that you like, podcasts, and you're still like in a helping role and, just like really going with your pleasure. And that was definitely one of the reasons why I decided to hire you, was because I knew that I would get like burned out by the editing and I didn't necessarily have the time for it. And I think that's where a lot of business owners go wrong is you need to hire to your weaknesses.
Yeah.
And, just like to pay people to do the things so you can stay in your pleasure, because like then you're so much more effective. So like tell us a little bit about like, a lot of people think, and I know this kept me from doing a podcast for a while, that it's like too hard. And I love, you've been such a little cheerleader along the way, being like, remember, this is supposed to be fun. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay, don't stress out. It's so funny in coaching because like a lot of times we have these barriers where we think it's about like this thing isn't working or it's too hard or it's a technology thing, when really it's just like we're in the middle of like a huge up level that's happening.
Yes.
That's what we're freaking out about. So like tell us a little bit about do you think it's a myth that podcasting is hard?
I do think it's a myth, and really the reason why. So there's two types of podcasts. There's a lead magnet, which is kind of how you're using your podcast, and there's a passion project, which is how I use mine. Mine is really based solely around my passion for music. I love music. Music lights me up. I love talking about it. It's just a guilty pleasure. But then there's other people that, you have this path and these goals for your business, and you think, okay, how do I drive more business? How do I get more people to my website? How do I get more people listening to what I have to say? How do I prove that I know what I'm talking about? Because you have your friends that are saying, oh, go try this place out, go try this person out, try that clinic out. There's so much information, you don't know who you can really trust. And it's proven that we buy from people that we know, like, and trust. So through the podcast, a lot of people are gaining that access to their ears to say, hey, I'm a real person. I have legit stuff to offer. Would you like to work with me? So why I don't think it's difficult is because you're talking about your passion. So you get to choose so many aspects of your podcast too. You choose, is it once a month? Is it once a week? Or you get to choose, is it 1 hour? Is it a half an hour? I think that's why I like mine so much, is because I just do it for 15 to 25 minutes, somewhere in there. And people talk about a song that they love. I get to dish with them, and then it's over. So I just think that podcasting is easy in the respect that the content itself, easy peasy. Now the other pieces, either A, hire them out, or Google it till you make it. That's my little phrase, Google it till you make it. If you can't figure it out, there's somewhere online that can help you figure it out.
Yeah, it's amazing with the age of information, and I definitely have binge watched people's podcasts where, like, even if I never work with that person, like, they have proven their expertise and they, like, changed my life because the depth is so huge, like, so, like, compared to, like, a Facebook Live or something like that, where, like, maybe you catch one, maybe you really like to listen to this person. It's different than, like, sequentially listening to episodes that just go, like, deeper and deeper into it. And I know for me, I grew up, like, watching talk shows with my mom, like Oprah and Phil Donahue and Ricky Lake and Sally Jesse Raphael. And it's like my talk show fantasy. Like, I love it. I mean, I love working with people in groups and, doing individual sessions, but there's something about the talk show vibe that just feels like really fun and easy, and just, I love getting to know people. So to have, like, a different person's story each time is just like, it supplies, like, my need for, like, novelty and just, like, novelty and depth. It's like,
Yeah.
this kind of interesting paradox. So, like, I went to the She Podcast conference, which I highly recommend for anyone considering doing a podcast, and it was a great sort of intro. Amazing women podcasters, which it's like a small curated group, although obviously with COVID, like, the podcast scene has, like, exploded since everyone was stuck
Yes.
at home. But can you tell us a little bit why it's, like, such a great strategy? Because it really is still sort of, it's been around, it's like a newer, less saturated field, right?
It's definitely less saturated. So there's like 8 million or something YouTube channels, and there's only 1 million podcasts, but only 850 of those are actually active. There's something known as the podcast fade. So it's usually around 7 episodes. People do it and they've run out of their really important things to say, and they're like, okay, I don't really know. I mean, I guess that was kind of fun, and they just kind of let it go. Why I think it's a great avenue now is, we're such in this binge phase, right? Like, what are you binging on Netflix? What are you binging on Hulu? So people can binge on your podcast as well. When people launch their podcast, I always say launch with 2 or 3 episodes at least, because you want someone to really dive into all of your nuggets that you are offering and go, wow, I can't wait till next week. The other thing that's great is when you subscribe to whatever podcast you're really enjoying, mostly the Divine Feminine Revolution.
Thank you. Love that.
Those episodes will automatically download for you, and they're waiting for you. They're just taunting you. They're like, I'm here. Got a couple of free minutes. Tune in. Come listen. So I do like it for that respect. And then just the mobility of it. So people are doing it while they're walking, they're doing it while they're working out, they're doing it while they're driving in the car, they're commuting somewhere. I know a couple of people that I've talked to about that are going to start their podcast. They've talked about how they got addicted because they were on a car trip, and they just were like, okay, I'm going to load up on podcasts and I'm going to go. Or some people in the airplane. So I just think that the mobility of how you can get your information out there, and then your friend is recommending it, your neighbor is starting one, your favorite psychologist is starting one. So I think that it's a great avenue just to get information easily accessible, and you can have it wherever you are.
Yeah, and I know for me, like I spend at least an hour or two in the car, and that's where I really got hooked into podcasts. And it like it, you know, with a live or something like that, or Instagram, or even a YouTube video, I thought that when I started a YouTube channel, it was like one of those podcast flops. Like I didn't stick with it. Although we are going to start a Divine Feminine Revolution podcast YouTube channel, so that's coming soon. For the video recordings, I'm going to upload those. But like YouTube, you have to do like the cover shot. Like there's just like some editing. The people that have really successful channels, like there's a lot that goes into it. And so I think there's something powerful. I mean, that's like when when our podcast went live, it was so different because I had done these like face-to-face interviews via video to grab the recording, but then to like have the faces and the visuals disappear and just have the voices, there's something like so mesmerizing and captivating and kind of like intellectual to that old school, like no video, just sort of like radio almost, vibe to it.
I kind of had that experience last Sunday, I think, with a football game. The football game was on in the car, and we were listening to it, and I was like, man, this is what it used to be like. Like, you really had to pay attention. Like, they're on this yard line, they're on this yard line. This player passed it off to this player. And it's kind of the same thing when you're listening to the podcast, because it's just the words of those people. You're not distracted by, oh, she's super pretty, or she has this weird tick, or he's talking whatever. You just really are paying attention just to the words, just to the meat, the content of what these people have to say.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of back in my early therapist days, I would do these like crisis line calls, and this was like pre like telemedicine and video and all that stuff, where like you would just answer the phone in the middle of the night, and like I would have these like deep, like existential, like some of the most like powerful conversations I've ever had, like in the middle of the night with a stranger, essentially, like during a crisis moment. And I feel like podcast is like a little bit like that. It's like so deep in a certain way. And, in our society now, we're like so overstimulated with notifications and so many forms of media. Like, I think it's just like, yeah, like a deeper intellectual, kind of like simpler version of it. And I know from the people that I've binge watched, I immediately wanted to hire them. So I know it is like definitely an experience where you got to see the person in kind of, I think, a more intimate frame, whether they're just sort of talking just themselves or whether they're interviewing people. It's a little different than just like ripping on a live where you have the interaction of the people comments or whatever. It's just like there's something just really deep to it. And from what I've heard, like the podcast listeners are the most loyal customers and listeners because, like you said, it gets downloaded to your phone, the episodes are waiting, people can binge watch. So a lot of times in the coaching communities, they talk about social media just being like super noisy. And I know I've gone to sign up for something and then a kid wants something or get distracted.
Yes.
And the podcasts are just like they're waiting for you in their little bubble. So I think it's just such an important, powerful medium.
I think you bring up a powerful point about getting distracted. So that's kind of the other beautiful piece about podcasts. When you're going through on your show notes and you're talking about like, okay, I read this book and this book impacted me so much and blah, 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 blah. You can cite that book in your show notes. So if somebody's listening and they're like, oh yeah, I want to go back to that, they don't have to just solely rely on their memory. They can go into your show notes and there it is. Oh yeah, that's that book she was talking about. Okay, yeah, that's her website. Okay, there's her Facebook group she was talking about. And they can access all that information at their fingertips and they don't have to try to remember. And even if they do get distracted, they know where to find that information. It's in that episode. They're not scrolling through Facebook or scrolling through Instagram trying to find that link again. It's already right there in their podcast queue.
Yeah, I love that. It reminds me of like when I first started coaching, one of my very first coaches introduced me to the book called The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks.
Mm.
It's an awesome book if you haven't read it. And they talk about like upper limit
Okay.
where we like start to self-sabotage, kind of like I was saying, like I'm launching Divine Feminine Revolution, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, this is really happening. Like I'm leaving a legacy, like it's powerful, like I'm showing up in
Yeah.
a new way. And then we go like, "Er," like I'm scared of this success or I'm scared of this positive thing. And we start to kind of like freak out and we, in therapy
Yeah.
we call it like self-sabotage, but it's really just like we don't know how to be 10% happier, 20% more successful, or 30% more visible, or whatever. And so we start going
Yeah.
like, our nervous system is like, WTF, like, what do I
Yeah.
do now? And so I think that's where you have been a godsend for me is like, like, how do I do this? What's next? So I highly recommend hiring someone. I'm sure you could hire Tiffany, recommend her.
Yes.
Um, so like, would you suggest people DIY it? Like, who are the people to DIY and who are the people to hire out? Like, who do you, how do you recommend?
I would always say hire some piece of it out.
Mhm.
And the reason being is because there's so many aspects. And, I think we ran into a little bump with when we came into our destinations. And it was nice for you to be able to say, okay, I've actually hit this bump and I didn't understand. I didn't know what was going to happen. And now you have that trusted person that you can rely on. So, even if everything goes seamless, you have that person that you can keep saying, is that normal? Should I be doing that? Is that right? And they're already on your team. So they're happy to let you know and cheer you on and say, oh, no problem, got this, or I've got the answer. Or, if they don't know, they've got a guy. So I think there's something invaluable to having somebody on your team with such a big project. It is a big chunk to chew off. Once you've done it all a couple of times, it's easy peasy. But those first couple of times, it's a lot of work. And I always recommend people to launch with at least 3 episodes. And you know what? If you have something on the side, I always recommend making a commercial for yourself. So I would say, let's pop that in the middle of your episode. Let's pop it at the end of your episode, wherever you think. But, it's just like I said, it's a big chunk to bite off. Yes, you can DIY it. Yes, you can try to figure it out. You will be tempted to get so many different coaches, though, and you will be tempted to, sign up for all these subscriptions and programs. And really, you're always just getting a fraction of what you need. So if anybody wants to do it, DIY it, Pat Flynn is a huge name in the podcast industry. If you want to go binge all of his episodes on YouTube and figure out how to podcast, great. If you're a very self-motivated person, if you can keep yourself on deadlines, that kind of thing. The other thing that I would say it's really important when you're considering your podcast, decide, can you do once a week? Is that a schedule you can keep up with? Whatever schedule is that you can keep up with, that's the schedule you should set. So if you really want 4, but you're too busy, do 2. That will make it more manageable for you.
Yeah, and I would recommend like we batched a bunch of episodes. Like I think I counted them out. We have like 35 episodes already. So even if I like couldn't do an episode, a new one for a month, like I've got plenty. And it really made it so I was super committed to it because I spent all the time. And it was a great networking thing. Like part of my power is in my relationships. And so being able to like, connect with these women. I've been working on the mindset that every conversation converts. So, as I'm getting it's like now I have all these business besties and, like they know me and they did something vulnerable. They like shared their story with me. And of course they're going to also, share it to their community. So it's a great, just like kind of get the word out thing. I think you bring up another piece that's really important is that like a lot of times we pay the big bucks to like hire the coaches to like teach us these things, but sometimes it's easier just to hire like your support people because I know like as a psychologist I DIY'd a lot of it myself. Like I used billing software, I did this and this, but like it makes more sense to pay someone a lesser amount an hour to actually do the work that I don't like to do, back to pleasure-based business, than
Yes.
need to like watch all the YouTube videos or hire the like, thousands of dollar coach to like maybe teach me to do something that like I still don't want to do or maybe not very good at, whatever. And so like when you DIY it, like you're getting thin results, and so I think that's been a big shift for me being like a solopreneur to just go like, okay, you know, that's something I need to invest in is like, I need to wrap my head around that, like, as I get bigger and bigger, like, I'm going to have a staff. And I saw that from my dear friend who owns a holistic treatment center. Like, she started wanting to do it all by herself. And now she's got like, she's going to be on the podcast later. She's got
Good.
like 4 different organizations. She's got like a staff of probably like 20, 30 people guessing, and so like
Yeah.
she became a CEO, like legit. And so I think sometimes as coaches, we just like, and it's a trauma response to want to do it all yourself. And so I think it's so powerful. And I love to hire other women entrepreneurs because then you're also supporting them and their
Yeah.
family and it's going to their communities and it just like feels so good and they help you and you don't have to do this you want to do, which is the best part about it. Like, I'm sold. I'm converted.
Yeah, yeah, it makes a big difference for sure. And just like I said, just have that support system, if nothing else, they're getting you through those nuts and bolts of the pieces that you really don't want to do. Um, and using your time wisely. It is keeping you in that pleasure space so that you're not like kind of dipping in and out, like, oh yeah, now I gotta do this part that I absolutely hate. Whereas with me, it's a phone call to me like, hey, you're still gonna do that, right? Yep, okay, bye. And you get to stay in the pleasure area.
Yeah, and then just like the reminders of like, you don't know what you don't know. So,
Mm.
like, hey, you're like, "Hey, you wanna do this?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's a thing. Oh, okay, yeah, I guess we do need to do that," or like, "Oh, we needed to be in that dimension." And so just like anything, there's such a learning curve to it that
Hmm.
I think especially dealing with technology, I tried to, like, learn my own funnel, and that was like to set it all up and hook it up and have it for sale. And I did figure it out, but like I spent many a sleepless night, like on YouTube. I had to like call in some favors with people who like actually knew what the fuck was going on, and I could have just like hired someone easily to just set that up and it would have taken them like no time
Hmm.
at all, and
I
so
know. I know.
sometimes we have to learn the hard way for sure.
Well, and sometimes I think too that like I mean, I feel like you're pretty confident just like I am. And so I think that we think it's almost like an ego thing, right? Like I can figure this out. I don't need to hire anybody. I can figure it out. But if you hired it out, it would have already been done and you would have saved yourself a lot of time. But sometimes we get stuck in I get stuck in that anyways. Where I'm like, no, I can figure it out. I can figure it out. I know I can. I can figure it out.
Yeah. And I mean, it's like a luxury, and to like have a support system and to have like a shared experience. I mean, I think that that's really helpful. And whether it's like hiring a coach or hiring a VA or hiring a podcast person, like, first of all, it's all like business deductions anyway. So
Yeah.
you can either give it to the government or you can have like someone help you make you so much more successful than you would have been if you had DIY'd it, right? So.
Yes, I was gonna touch on that earlier and I forgot. Yeah. At the end of the day, it's a deduction. So help yourself out.
Yeah, exactly, and think about, like, the billable hours you could get back, because I'm sure you've gotten really fast at editing for the most part, but, like, it's still, like, you have to kind of babysit the process, right? I mean, that's
Mhm.
not something that even if you're a great editor, it just takes time, right?
Well, and some people use software to edit, and I don't. I use myself. But I think that there's a lot more value in that because if you run it through the software, it's going to take out some stuff, but it doesn't. It doesn't have the intelligence behind it. You right? So just it's apple picking just those pieces that it's supposed to pick. Where sometimes an is okay in a sentence. Sometimes it sounds good when it's in there, especially if there's a lot of space before and there's a lot of space after, and that person can really convey that they're thinking about the next thing that they want to say. They're being intentional. They're being thoughtful, and so I think that there's something to be said about um, you you were saying, sorry, that I could become faster, and I definitely have become faster, but that you still have to babysit it, and I definitely have to babysit it because it's not going through a software. I'm doing it. So there's different things you can hire out, and there's different price points for those things, but I think it's also wise to be aware of, oh, I'm going to hire this company and they set it through the software and it just does everything for them, and it only takes 5 minutes and they charge me a lot less. Well, that's fine, but just remember, it could be taking out some of the relationship, some of the connection in their voice inflection or in the sake of the conversation itself. So I think just things to be aware of, when you're hiring pieces out.
And I think that human touch is so important because like a computer is not going to be able to understand the nuances of communication. So I think that's a great point. I've also like listened to podcasts where like the intro is like really loud, and then the sound quality like shifts over, and like some of those things, like it's fine, like you get better as you go kind of thing. But like I know it's kind of like when a website page is loading and it takes a long time to load, like
Yeah.
people are just not that forgiving. And
No.
so I
Right.
know when I listened to the first episode, I was like, oh, like it sounds so smooth, and
Oh,
like that music
good.
sounded good, and like it was just like a really different experience to have it like professionally like vetted. And like when you picked out the audiogram clip, I thought you picked out like a fabulous clip that
Oh,
really
good.
encapsulated like the story of what she was talking about. And it was like you picked out a moment that was like her telling a story about like a transformation from start to finish, and I was like, yes, like that gives you like, it leaves you wanting more. And so like
Mhm.
I did price out other people, including like bigger companies that like hire some of those things out. But for me, it's like always important to support like women business entrepreneurs, and that's what I think the Divine Feminine Revolution is about. Like, we don't want to just hand it all over to big corporations. We want to like support local families, local communities, like local women who are doing it. Because yeah, like you might have the destiny to grow and grow and grow, like we said, but there's also like, we need to make sure that solopreneurs are successful as well. And that's where I want to spend my money, is with a solopreneur.
Yeah, well, cool. I appreciate that very much. Yeah. It's fun to connect with everyone and just kind of see where they come from. And I think that is a lot of smaller businesses. I think we all want to support each other, like it's fun to see somebody else succeed, and it's fun to support somebody else and see their journey too. So, yeah, I appreciate that. It's been a good partnership so far.
Yeah. And so, and you handled my freak out so well. It's one of the times,
Good.
I'm like, oh my God, am I being a bitch? And it's just one of those things, like we're so scared as women to like come off as like bitchy or to like ask for help. I think, as far as like creating media, to be like heard, to be seen and heard is like so freaking vulnerable. And so, like, to really put your body of work out there, like you're leaving a legacy. And I think that's super powerful. And so I think, whether you're the host of a podcast, like we both have ours, or like if you're in a supporting role, like I just feel like it's so powerful in the sense that we're like legit, like changing the paradigm, and we're changing society really by putting
Yeah.
these ideas out there. So I always ask people, as you know, in the podcast, like, what's their vision for the future? Like, what do you think will happen as, the Divine Feminine Revolution happens, is like more and more women get to rise with time and financial freedom. Like, what's your version of that? Tell us.
Well, I think that it's great to see women, gaining a lot more powers, and it almost, in a sense, it has some similarities to Black Lives Matter because um, it's almost not spoken about.
Mhm.
So I think it's interesting to, the divine feminine revolution. I think it's great that women voices are being heard. They're adding to the conversation, and it's fun to see everybody. It's fun to see the women get the recognition that they deserve. Because some women work really hard and they make those sacrifices, but there's a double standard, right? And then they're getting paid less. So I just think it's kind of cool that that's all coming out right now. I think that everybody, especially with COVID, a lot of women have started their own businesses, have really revamped what they want life to look like for them. And I think a lot of us are getting more balance, because we say who we're going to talk to, we say what the content is about, we say how everything's going to go down. We don't have corporate America over us saying, nope, you have to do step 1, then step 2, then step 3. We are taking the bull by the horns, and we are saying, we are here, there's something to say, and watch out, because here we go.
I love that. That's totally the spirit of it. And I remember when COVID first hit, with like the very first part where we were like on lockdown, and there was this part of me that's like, this is amazing. Like, I get to stay at home. Like, I was lucky to still be able to do like virtual sessions, but I was home with my like daughter and my husband, and like my beautiful house, like in nature. And it was like, I mean, amidst the like crisis vibe, which was definitely
Right.
present, like, um,
Hmm.
but it was like a really, just on the microscopic, in our little environment, like it was like a very like peaceful moment, because we got more time with each other. And like I'm all about making money and some financial freedom, but like for me it was really about like time freedom. Because as a solopreneur, like with my private practice, like if I was having a bad day, I was like, well, I still have to go work because if I don't work, I don't make money. And
Right.
I think having like a podcast set up for you where it's doing the client attraction work,
Mhm.
setting up passive income, online education courses, like there's so much money to be made. And for me, it's like a social impact thing. Like, I've spent like the past 10, 15 years like healing individually and with groups, like so many women. And like, so I've just seen these like trends and I've like know what works. And I've gotten all this wisdom out of those experiences of listening to people's inner thoughts and their struggles and how they overcome it and getting to be witness and help people transform those things. And so like that's wisdom that, like, I can just sell you. Like, I can give you the content,
Yeah.
and read the podcast episodes, right? And,
Yep.
you don't necessarily like there is power in telling your story, which obviously is like a huge part of this podcast. Like that is powerful to be witnessed in that. But it's also powerful just to get like the wisdom, like, your story is my story, and my story is your story. So like, you know, it's like kind of like a shortcut, like straight up download into
Yeah.
how you change your life, and that's immediately where I was hooked. And so that's where I think like from a psychology point of view, they talk about like we really need to kind of change what's fucked up about society and like, fix some of these systemic things that are making people sick versus trying
Mhm.
to fix people one on one. And so that's what I think is really exciting about the paradigm shift of people having their own media platforms. They can write their own book, they can have their own
Mhm.
YouTube channel, they can have their own podcast, and it's like not locked away in the ivory tower. And you don't necessarily have to have health benefits. Like all you have to do is like subscribe to a podcast or subscribe to a channel.
Yeah.
So yeah, by the way, like and subscribe while we're doing it. But it's really powerful and it cuts out like the middleman. And so I think like, knowledge to the people is like what's going to make this world a better, happier, healthier, safer place. Um, Tell us a little bit about how can we work with you? Like from someone who's like a newbie, like they've got the passion pull to do the podcast, but they like maybe haven't even listened to podcasts or they don't know what to start or they feel like it's too expensive or too hard. Like how could you overcome those objections and like how do you, sort of like wrangle people in when they're thinking about it?
Okay. Well, I have on my website, I have this page that is helps you get ready. Okay. And a quick rundown for what's on the page is what are you going to talk about? So, what is your content? Do you have more than 7 episodes worth of something to say? How are you going to sustain this podcast? Your podcast artwork, what do you want it to look like? It also has the specs in here for people because that changes from time to time with Apple. Everything changes from time to time. I feel like every other day with Apple. And then there has, if you're going to record remotely, how do you do that? Right? Like, okay, I know I really want to interview people, but what does that look like? Or maybe I don't want to interview people. So just to kind of have a plan in place, now how to cut out the junk, how to edit, what software are you going to use for that? What does that look like? How much time would something like that take? It has the high and goodbyes, so the intro and the outro, how to pick your music, where to get royalty free music. That's a huge thing. You guys cannot use any music that is licensed or copyright unless you have the rights to it. And then the details, the show notes. What's going to go in your show notes? Do you want to talk about your website? Do you want to talk about your Facebook group? Do you just want to make a quick little snippet about what your episode is about? So you get to decide on that and then get social. So are you going to be are you going to be on Facebook? Are you going to be on Instagram? What does that look like? How often are you going to post? It's good to have these things in place and be thinking about it. Like, what am I really committing to? And then it does say on here too, as far as a schedule, if you think you can do once a month, just do once a month. Do something that your listeners, your subscribers can predict and look forward to. So we know Bachelor's going to come on every Tuesday night, right? Our Bachelorette is going to come on every Tuesday night. But if it was like sometimes on Thursday and sometimes on Saturday and once in a while, that's not fun. That's not, we're creatures of habit of schedule. And we like to know when things are going to happen, a little bit of predictability. So I would just say, pick a schedule you can keep to. And then there's just some extra things at the bottom as far as where you can get the royalty free music, an interface, headphones, a microphone, whatever you would want to use for the podcast, just to increase sound quality. But normally I just try to go over those points with them, get them thinking. And then also on my website, there is another page you can download, and it kind of gives you a template for your actual podcast episode. So maybe things you would want to mention, 3 aspects that you'd want to really hit on during your interview. There's a little spot for research if you need to look up that person's social handles, or you actually need to look up the author to some kind of book or whatever. And then when you feel confident, you're more likely to stay on that schedule. When you're kind of loosey goosey and you're all over, and you're like, I don't know what I'm going to do next week. I mean, maybe, I don't know. It's a lot easier to go, okay, I'm just going to skip just 1 week. And then 1 week becomes 3 weeks. And then before you know it, you've hit the podcast fade. So I would just be intentional, have a little thought process behind, what the intention is, what you want to be talking about, how you're going to execute it. And then, hit record and hope for the best.
Yeah, and I think just with any kind of like coaching or investment, like a big part of it is just the accountability piece, because
Mm-hmm.
like we tend to serve other people. I know when I was working for agencies, like I always had my stuff done on time because I never wanted to get in trouble. But then when I was the boss and I wasn't necessarily going to hold myself accountable, like, oh, well, maybe tomorrow, I'll get it done. So it's great to have someone, who's providing that structure and accountability and a deadline. Because I think it just makes the partnership work. Because I mean, it's just true for most people. We are more beholden to other people with
I
structured
agree.
deadlines than other people, And I think for me, like even just investing in your services, like I'm committed to doing it. And for me, because I am a little more loosey goosey, obviously, you know that now, Tiffany. Like it really helped to like pre-record all those because I'm like ahead of it, and so it
Mhm.
let me do my natural. Some episodes, like some weeks I had 5 episodes, some I didn't have any, so it let me go
Mhm.
with my natural flow. But now we can kind of like stay ahead of it, to be able to have those like regular weekly releases. So,
Yeah,
um,
awesome.
obviously go check out Divine Feminine Revolution podcast. Obviously, you're already listening to this, so you're halfway there, or you are there. You can keep listening. We appreciate you. And then Tiffany, tell us like for people who want to hire you, like tell us where to find you and all the goods.
Sure. So I am at www.virtuallyu, as in virtual assistant.com. You can find me. My Instagram handle and my Facebook handle are the same. It is virtually you podcast VA, and you'll find me. And then there's actually a group too. So 2 ways to find my group. It's called Podcast Possibilities on Facebook. Or if you listen to Memories with a Beat, which is my podcast, it's always in my show notes. So either way, you can find me.
That's so awesome. And I love the virtually you part because like that is the beauty of it, like as women, I think we have this like super woman thing of like, I need to be all the places and do all the things. And, it's almost like we wear busy as a badge of honor. And that's really like much more masculine energy than feminine energy. And so I think part of it is like really to be in our power and delegate and get assistance because like we know like with raising kids it like takes a village like well like with any project or business like it's your baby too and so
That's right.
you're gonna need help. But don't think that it's too hard to do because it definitely is doable. And I would highly recommend, hiring someone to help you like manifest your vision because, the world needs to hear from you. And, it's a great way to just be part of the zeitgeist. I'll put the links in the show notes and, we'll definitely check out some of those resources. I know I need to probably double back and check out a few things of my own. I'm like, wow, that sounds really, really good. I didn't do my homework um, in checking out some of those things. But yeah, like beautiful. Thank you so much for coming on here. And I think it's so powerful to like empower women to follow their dreams and tell their stories and to just like contribute to the knowledge base is so powerful.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. And I look forward to continuing to get some good podcasts out for you.
Okay, awesome. Thanks everybody. And we'll see you next time. Bye. Thanks for listening to the Divine Feminine Revolution podcast. Make sure to subscribe and leave a 5-star review. Want to keep the conversation flowing? Find us on Facebook at the Divine Feminine Revolution Facebook group, where revolutionary women gather to listen to their hearts, monetize their gifts, and change the world.